I would like to start my presentation on Surrealism and Visual Art. My name is Raivo Kelomees, and during last week I had a very interesting experience taking from the shelf book what I wrote exactly 30 years ago with the title Surrealism. I've read this book once again, and interestingly, it was not so bad as I expected, because it was based on already existing material. A little bit more than 10 sources were used to write this overview. And but I'm not sure that I'm very warm concerning many ideas which are connected with surrealism and visual art. But it's interesting to mention the fact that the book was written before internet time, and it was written with typewriter. Computers were not available then. But let's look at some examples what we can define as precursors of surrealist art. And naturally, there are many works which are mentioned by surrealist writers, what we can consider as examples of surrealistic thinking in visual arts. And naturally, Hieronymus Bosch, the Garden of Earthly Delights, belongs to this a series of example, and especially Hell, the right wing of this triptych, where you find several characters which are in very frightful compositions with each other. Then Peter Bruegel the Elder, the Fall of Rebel Angels, and the Fall of Magician Hermogenes. They all, what we see in all those pictures, it's very unearthly situations. And artists throughout the ages have had imagination where they wanted to transcend the reality which they were surrounded by. Naturally, Matthias Grunewald, my big favorite. I have seen this work in original shape in French city of Colmar. And again, the rightist wing of that composition, which depicts Temptation of Saint Anthony. Here again, we see very aggressive composition of surreal, we can say, animals which form is based on the very normal animals which we can encounter in our nature, but they are transformed naturally in almost unrecognizable forms. Giuseppe Arcimboldo depicts with using the objects, fruits and vegetables, where through which humans are depicted. This phenomena has a title pareidolia, when we are able to see human or animal faces or shapes in other objects, which is maybe even better visible in Jos de Momper works, where landscapes reminds us faces in 16th century. And Giovanni Battista Brasselli, oddities of various figures. We see that artist has very creatively played with different objects. Shaping, depicting humans or living beings. Sorry. And there are more examples which could be defined as a precursors of surrealist art, like William Blake, Caspar David Friedrich, Arnold Böckling, and John Martin. Most of them are rather romantic painters, romantic artists, and why they are elevated to the precursors status. I think their atmosphere in their painting depicts sort of another reality, not very usual surroundings what we have seen. Certainly Arnold Böckling, there is a legend that he was inspired by one island in Venice lagoon to paint this Isle of the Dead painting. Johann Heinrich Flüssli. And we can talk about a category of art what we name anomalous art, the art of primitives, mediums, and autodidacts and mentally ill people. And naturally, in the 19th century, African sculptures and traditionalists art was influencing very much young artists and practice of mediums. And that truth could be found in hypnosis or trance or sleep. And again, Füssli's, Heinrich von Kleist's writings, Victor Hugo paintings. Victor Hugo was knowingly kind of amateur painter who used ink or paint, randomly throwing it on the surface and then painting forward from it. And this sort of ink blot painting practice became, in the late 19th century, very popular entertainment among people. And the author Justinus Kerner was one of them who defined this klexography method, and later this klexography, this inkblot practice, became source for Rorschach inkblot tests. Hermann Rorschach was a psychologist, and Rorschach tested this very recognized method of psychiatric testing even now. What's interesting, so even online you're able to do this Rorschach test. Basically, you're asked what you see in the that ink blot, and the psychiatrist asks then additional questions naturally, and your task is to fantasize what kind of objects or animals or humans you see in those ink blots, and it shows quite a lot of about your internal life or your psyche. And if you have some very severe psychiatrical problems, then they come out, because then you will probably see very odd animals there. And the art of naivists, naturally, or people who were not educated by kind of academical, not touched by academical education, like Ferdinand Cheval, who was the postman, who just gathered stones and built such a palace, which is attraction in France even now. Art of outsiders and mentally ill people. Some very famous books were written in or published in the first half of the 20th century, like The Art of Fools, Marcel Ream, Dr. Morgenthaler, Ein Geisteskranker als Künstler, which is as mentally ill as an artist, and by Hans Prinzhorn, images or paintings of mentally ill, and some very celebrity fools we can find from the history of art, like Adolf Wölfli or Alois. They all are presented now in Art Brut Museum in Lausanne, Switzerland. I have been there once, very interesting place, established after the Second World War by Jean de Buffet. And naturally, we can talk about Dada. 1916, we know the date when it was established in Cabaret Voltaire in Zurich, which we know that it was anti-movements, anti-art. Important names in art and music were represented there on events of Dada, Hans Arp, Richard Hülsenbeck, Marcel Janko, Tristan Tzara. Music by Erik Satie and Arnold Schönbergi was presented there. They were reading simultaneous poetry in different languages at the same time, phonetic poems, Brutist music was presented there. And Cabaret Voltaire exists even now in Zurich. Some images what I made myself approximately 10 years ago. There's a cafe and a restaurant part, and a lot of memorabilia on the walls, which reminds us history of Dadaism, and the stone on the wall of the house, which states that on 5th February 1916 was Cabaret Voltaire opened and Dadaism was founded. And Tristan Tzara name is very well known with one scenario or recipe, we could say, what we can read as a computer program, which is basically kind of Dadaistic chants poetry, where instructions say that take a newspaper, scissors, and cut this article into pieces and put together these words, and then you can have your Dadaistic poem, which is very, very frequently quoted, especially in connection with digital artworks as well, because it's kind of chance-based work, and this chance-based practice became very dominant in the Dadaistic practices, like we see in Max Ernst collages, and especially clearly in Marcel Duchamp's work of Chant's three standard stoppages. The work, which was done so that from the height of the 1 meter, ropes, small lines of rope were were dropped to the floor, and this curvature of this kind of rope was copied, and lineals were cut after this curvature of this rope, and it was preserved. And it's so-called tinged chance. And Duchamp had his own ambitions in connection with traditional art. He just didn't want it to paint anymore. He got kind of negative feedback, I understand, from the different juries of exhibitions, and he just wanted try to switch to the different kind of practices. And these standard stoppages are presented in many museums of contemporary art today. Some images what I took myself, different museum. This is from some Frankfurt museum. I don't even remember what it was, but naturally this kind of lineals, this kind of copies of the curvature was presented in a very perfectly shaped box. And some other works, naturally, what he was famous of. A fountain, which was a pissoir from 1917, the large glass, the film Anemic Cinema, which was based on his rotoreliefs, and his rotorelief plates, the mechanism, which is sort of kind of precursor of kinetic art, you can say, which was built, original one was built in 1920, but this is reconstruction actually also taken from one some of contemporary museum. And one interesting fact which is connected with the Duchamp's some works like this bicycle wheel here in the center. Originally, it was open for participation. The audience could touch it, could turn it. And now, naturally, you cannot touch it if it's in a museum. But interesting facts for researchers of interactive art, because it's work already which was open for participation. When we are hunting these kind of examples of participation or interaction in the art history, then here we see one of them. Kurt Schwitters' name is extremely important in connection with Dadaism and his Merz works and his Merzbau, which was kind of installative construction in his building where he lived. And this Merz is taken from Commerzbank, what he saw over the street. And Kurt Schwitters' Ursonat is the most important, probably, in connection with sound poetry, kind of archetypical or arche example of sound poetry available online. Man Ray, inventor of photography, who used ready-made kind of objects on photo paper, like you see this left image, and designed several things, also chess sets, very various designs of chess sets was designed by him throughout the years. Then we can talk about pre-surrealist experiments. I'm here following in connection with this titles of my book, and Klee, de Chirico, and Picasso are defined as authors of pre-surrealist experiments. Naturally, they started before this well-known dates of 1924, when Surrealist Manifest was written. Surrealism term was first used by Guillaume Apollinaire, as we know, instead of surnaturalism. And here's important sentence. Actually, I'm not sure if it's very correctly translated from 1918 by Pierre Reverdy. An image is a pure creation of the spirit. It cannot be born from a comparison, but from the approximator of two more or less distant realities. This is almost like a definition what visual art in surrealism is, that two more or less distant realities are like put together, and it makes this kind of effect of surrealist visuality. Impossible things are put together. Here, 1921, André Breton visits Sigmund Freud in Vienna. Okay, a lot of random facts, naturally. Let's look at pictures. Paul Klee. You can almost say that he represents sort of primitive or non-educated kind of amateur art, but naturally he was very well educated, very professional, and he was not very tightly connected with surrealism, but still inspirator, author of inspiration for other artists. Giorgio De Chirico, who started his metaphysical painting already before dates, already 1916, when he founded Scuola Metafisica in Ferrara. Some other authors which were connected with futurist art as were Carlo Carra. Alberto Savinio was his brother, Giorgio Morandi. And as you see, his paintings are more or less realistic, and they represent, as we can say, veristic surrealist art. And basically we can say there are two kinds of surrealist visual art: veristic or naturalistic surrealism and absolute surrealism, originated from the spontaneous automatism. And this absolute surrealism is sort of inspirational for following abstract expressionism. De Chirico influenced René Magritte, Yves Tanguy, Max Ernst, Salvador Dalí. Pablo Picasso was not exactly part of the surrealist movement, but naturally he lived at the same time. He even claimed that he invented the word surrealism, which is not true, naturally, but his works were very various. It's very hard to say what kind of style he had, but he experimented with forms of the humans on their paintings, on his paintings, a lot. And basically he did very similar things what we can see in Salvador Dalí paintings, kind of took a part of human body and put them together differently. I selected only 3 paintings where it's very visible. And period of manifest from 2024 to 29. And here I would like to emphasize that during the first manifest of Surrealism in 1924, there was no a discussion about some paintings or visual art in the surrealism. It was mostly literary and poetical direction in art. But then already from 1925, from the 4th issue of La Révolution Surréaliste by in journal, André Breton wrote the text Surrealism and Painting, where is a very remarkable sentence you can find from the text. In order to respond to the necessity upon which all serious minds now agree for a total vision of real values, the plastic work of art either refer to a purely internal model or will cease to exist. This purely internal model, this term is very important when we are kind of looking for a definition of surrealist art. This is what is kind of essential here, that the artwork is based on purely internal model. It's not copying reality. That's the meaning of it. And here we can mention first generation of surrealist artists, Max Ernst, André Masson, Man Ray, Juan Miró, Francis Picabia, Pablo Picasso, René Magritte, Yves Tanguy. And one sentence also which is important to define what is visual art in the surrealism of Comte Lautréamont, Chance, I'm quoting Chance juxtaposition of a sewing machine and an umbrella on a dissecting table. It's became almost like a definition of what the surrealism is. That again, what you see if you are diving into what's kind of visually happening here, two contradictory objects are put together in the completely alien environment. Several games were played or invented by surrealists, like one of them is Exquisite Corpse, which is drawing by several authors. Every next author is adding some visual parts for the former drawer, and finally this image is taken apart, and finally we see this kind of surrealist composition. I think this is a very popular game. Even children play now. It's different other surrealistic techniques like automatism, bulletism, calligram, collage, Kubomania, invented by Romanian artist Gerasim Luka. The painting is taken apart and then put together differently. Cut-up technique, similar to Tristan Tzara proposal, entropic graphomania, indecipherable writing. You can almost say that it was inspiration for different sub-genres of abstract expression. There were several authors who imitated kind of written texts where you cannot understand anything. Fumage, the painting which was done with the candle. Frottage, with the rubbing, with scratching on surface. Grattage, also similarly, scratching the surface and revealing the background of the painting. The calcomania, when you're putting two painted surfaces on each other and then tearing them off, then you're achieving this kind of landscape. Oscar Dominguez was inventor of this, the calcomania method, but Max Ernst was maybe most famous exploiter of these methods, making his very kind of impressive paintings. Here you see this, the calcomania with added painterly material. And there are a lot of other surrealist techniques, soufflage, paranoid critical method, which is method by Salvador Dalí, naturally, sur-automatism, triptography, autography, involuntary sculpture, and many, many others. You can find them in Wikipedia. Salvador Dalí, probably most prominent surrealist visual artist, but he was very scandalous, and he was very inventive in building his fame. And his wife, Gala, was greatly supportive for him. And Salvador Dalí played quite a lot with this pareidolia phenomenon, where forms or objects are depicting the faces or figures. In many of his paintings, you can see this, like a slave market here, metamorphosis of Narcissus, many sculptures of many objects, and in Figueres in Spain, there is a museum of Salvador Dali, which is built in the former theater. And many sculptures which are built on his ideas. The author completely different sculptures, sculpturers who were inspired by Dali's works, sometimes are doing three-dimensional works. René Magritte is also kind of synonymous or belongs to the Surrealist paintings with very paradoxical images, and especially with this work, this is not a pipe where the pipe is depicted, and maybe again a good example of what the Surrealism and Visual Art tries to do, to put together contradictory visuals which do not belong together. Time transfixed. Understand that in French it means like duration stabbed, and Yves Tanguy, Victor Brauner. You see many artists. Victor Brauner was a Romanian French artist. You see that all artists are, I think they all are good as artists, not because they are surrealist. Sometimes they were surrealist, so-called surrealist, because they belong to the group and they were exhibiting their works during the surrealist painting. But from the contemporary point of view, I don't see here any specific surrealistness in their paintings. Léonore Feny, what's interesting in connection, Léonore Feny and other female artists in connection with surrealism, then there were a few of them naturally. Dorothea Zanning, Leonora Carrington, Frida Kahlo, Meret Oppenheim, Remedios Vara, Helen Lundberg, Kai Sage. And now, quite recently, in the recent decades, surrealist female artists are discovered and many exhibitions are held of their work. For instance, here, Frida Kahlo is, without a doubt, the most important female artist of the 20th century. I even I didn't include his works, but probably have seen them, and they are really kind of impressive, emotionally very charged, you can say, and based on her physical and psychological sufferings. One genre which belongs to the surrealist art is surrealistic objects, which were designed by surrealists to be inspirational for their other works, like Man Ray, Indestructible Object, was designed already in the 20s. He needed to have somebody in his studio, that somebody is following him with his eyes, with her eyes, and then he imagined that metronome could function as the follower or the spectator. And finally, he distracted these objects. Joseph Cornell, Maurice Henry, Wilhelm Freddy, Salvador Dali. Again, Salvador Dali, Aphrodisiac jackets. Kurt Seligman. You see, all those objects are combining very contradictory objects, contradictory visuals. Merit Oppenheim, the Fur Lunch, and that's again, they are very well showing what the surrealistic visuals were about, that to put together different things which do not belong together. It's very important actually to mention that transition of some surrealistic ideas in abstract expression was very visible in Jackson Pollock works, but already in the context of surrealism, Andrea Masson and Wolfgang Pahlen did works what we can consider as a kind of pre-abstract expressionism paintings. And even now we can say that abstract art has its very important role in the contemporary art. There are plenty of abstract expressionist artists in Estonian art as well. In photography, there are also several examples where authors played with visuals, with forms, stretching the body parts and making very surreal compositions. Hans Bellmer names is quite remarkable in the context of surrealism. I like especially his drawing and paintings, but here I bring you some images of his dolls. He was obsessed with dolls, started to design them from the 30s already, and surrealists were very fascinated by his works. Then he emigrated to Paris, exhibited his works with surrealists, and he was inspired by beauty of his 15-year-old cousin Ursula, and also visited Jack Offenbach's play The Tales of Hoffmann, where the man falls in love with automaton. And there is also opinion that with this disfigured doll parts, he was opposing fascism in Germany, where there was a cult of perfect body, what we can see in Leni Riefenstahl, Triumph of the Will. And there are a lot of interpretation of his dolls, naturally, that Bellmer's dolls are his own surrogates, localizing her libido into feminine other. Sue Taylor writes in his research here. Let's browse quickly through the examples of the work Die Puppe. You can almost say that they are very pornographical and erotical, certainly. And one of his painting. Bellmer's influences you can see in contemporary artworks as well, like in the film Ghost in the Shell, the second part of it, where the doll or this kind of robot or cyborg is formed very similarly as the Bellmer dolls are represented in his compositions. Surrealism in other media is very kind of long story, and I'm just sketching. Certainly, you can say that surrealism visuality is everywhere in our visual surroundings, in advertisements, in films, in I don't know, maybe even in architecture, actually in the new media art. Here is one example from 1991 by Bill Seaman, The Exquisite Mechanisms of Shivers, where the author on the screen can compose different movies, different clips, and each clips corresponds to several sentences, several words, and then you finally can play it. And in artificial intelligence software, naturally, you can train, you can explore possibility of surrealist compositions very well, or knowingly or not, some AI artists are kind of exploiting this phenomena, what we are familiar from surrealist paintings already. For instance, Mario Klingemann work. And many works designed by AI artists are very successfully sold on auctions, but certainly influences of surrealism you can see in many other artists' creation, like for instance Francis Bacon. He was not exactly surrealist, but naturally he was influenced by this kind of deformative practices. We can talk about surrealism in Estonia very shortly, just mentioning very few works and very few authors. There are plenty of them actually. Edward Wiiralt and his Hell, which was graphical work in beginning of 30s. He lived in Paris, by the way, but as far as it's known, he was not connected with the surrealists there. But this work naturally depicts the situation or atmosphere in society at those times, and it's completely crazy and surreal work. Especially emphasis here is made by artists on eyes. And this playing with eyes, or kind of blind persons, or all possible experience with eyeballs are not rare. Actually, in Victor Brauner, some works you can find the similar parallels. And his cabaret, some close-ups. Ülo Sooster's name is also important. Most of his artistic career, he lived in Moscow after Siberia. And his works depict very stylized the natural forms, you can say, junipers mostly. And naturally, these are not all examples, but just paintings. And Eck and juniper tree were the most frequent visual elements in his paintings. And Ilmar Malin, actually, the author who part of his creation was dedicated to this kind of objects, which are partly animalistic, partly kind of based on the trees or trunks or different kind of natural objects. And here I would like to finish. Thank you very much.